One of the questions that he asked as like a self-reflective question that could help you was the question of, do you like what it is costing you?
I'm Susan Goss, and as a seasoned therapist of more than 15 years, I'm honored to have had the opportunity to gain so much wisdom from so many people and love passing that knowledge on to others. So join me and some of my favorite friends as we share some tangible truths with you.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Tangible Truth Podcast. I'm Susan Goss, and I am so excited to have with us today Katie Ubben. Hey, Katie.
Hi, Susan. Thank you for having me.
I am thrilled to have you. Katie is a colleague of mine right here at Fresh Roots Counseling, and I asked her to join us because, y'all, I'm going to jump back and just talk about for a second the last 4 weeks, Katie. We have been talking about the brutal realities of pornography addiction. And because you talk about it in your practice just as I do. And we have had such an amazing response to those 4 weeks. And Katie and I went to another training for half a day. It was 9 to 12, but it was another part of that was on the addiction of technology.
Yes.
And since they went hand in glove, I ran over to Katie and I said, Katie, you want to do a podcast on this? And she said, I would love to. And I so appreciate you doing it because it does go hand in glove with what we just talked about, because there's a thing in therapy that we call the tolerance-based addicted cycle. And it's like it's a hit and then you can't get enough, so you go back for more.
Right.
And then you just can't get enough. Well, pornography is not the only one. And we learned about technology and especially about games.
Yes.
And it was very interesting, wasn't it?
It absolutely was. It opened my eyes to just how significant of a problem it is, especially with adolescents and young adults.
Yes. And we both took notes. So we'll be going, we'll be ping-ponging back and forth, but it was really good. It was led by, we want to give them all the credit. It was led by Chad Imhoff, a dear friend of mine and a colleague as well, because I'm a co-founder of the Joshua Center. So I dearly love the Joshua Center. And Chad is a director of the Joshua Center. So he was one of the speakers, and he and Ian McCready.
Yes.
And Ian is the founder of SelfCtrl, a nonprofit. And he's lived here about 4 years, he said, in Northwest Arkansas. And Ian has a story. His nonprofit was birthed out of his own story of addiction to games.
Yes.
And it was a wonderful testimony. And I actually, because Katie and I are both therapists, we actually learned the most from Ian about games. And it's amazing the depths that people go into gaming, isn't it?
Yes. I was not aware of all of the intricate layers that are built into just the gaming industry. And one thing that really stood out to me was just learning how truly, I believe the word he used was predatory it can be, the way that they're designed to create that hook that can begin an addiction for someone in that world.
Yes, he did use the word predatory. He also said they design the games that way so that you must do one thing before you get to the other level. Like you will just need to win, but you have to do something before you can win. Did you catch that? It was hidden in the game where you never intended to do something, but you had to do it in order to win the next level. He said it was so he was so deep into it that he lost all. He lost friendships, relationships.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't going to class. I mean, it was just, it was awful.
And he talked about how a big component of that was when you make it to a certain level, there's a certain status that goes along with that, and how you can feel like a nobody in your everyday life. But then when you achieve a certain level of status within a particular game, you are then a somebody.
Yes.
And it's like a badge of honor, and it becomes something that you identify with, and it becomes such a significant component of your self-esteem and your self-worth.
That then you're two people. You're two different people. But that's the person that you, the status that you maintain in the gaming world is the one that you keep achieving and want more and more of. Yes, it was very interesting. Another stat I will say that I thought was interesting, starting back in 2021, and interestingly enough, I don't think the listeners will be surprised about this, right after COVID hit and everybody was locked down and everybody became, addicted to their screens, the numbers really went up very high on screen time, specifically, again, in 2021 on the tweens and teens in this world of addiction with technology. In particular, listeners, on girls, which I found was interesting. And a tween is considered 8 to 12 years old, and a teen is considered 13 to 18 years old. So just think about that at a period of time, an 8-year-old getting in front of a screen, becoming addicted. So we've just done 4 weeks of podcast about porn addiction. That makes perfect sense to me.
Sure.
Because that's what we were talking about, even at 8 years old. Now he's saying the same thing about gaming, which makes perfect sense to me about screen times. So there's a common denominator, and it's screen time.
Yes.
Did you get that stat written down?
One that stood out to me when he was specifically talking about video games and the percentage of teenagers addicted to video games, he had said 8.5%. But then what felt even more significant to me was that 50% of teens would say that they feel addicted to their phones in general.
In general. Yes.
I think that could include video games, but also just, social media and all of the various apps and platforms you can find on your phone.
Yes. And he covered, but not in full. I mean, we can't possibly cover everything he covered on this podcast, but one thing that he warned against is you have no idea how hidden some of these things are for tweens and teens in the gaming world in particular, but on your phone, which we also covered. This goes hand in glove with the porn, how they hide, how it's hidden, and then all of a sudden you're addicted. One of the things that I wanted us to cover, Katie, is there was a graph they put up on the screen about good habits, bad habits.
Yes.
And that was very good.
Yes. That really stood out to me as
too.
well.
It stood out to me. You want to mention that?
Sure. So he called it the habit spectrum. And if you would imagine like the bottom half of a like a semicircle is the spectrum. Maybe picture like a smiley face. And then on the far right-hand side at the top of that would be addiction, like a full-fledged addiction. A step down from that on the circle would be bad habits. Then in the middle would just be like a neutral habit. On the other end of that is good habits. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum from the addiction side would be what he labeled connection. He defined the opposite of addiction as being connection because of how addiction can be so isolating and can really cause you to withdraw from friends and family. And so the other side of that is connection. And then he took that a step further to specifically say connection with Jesus.
100%. I loved the way he did that because my big word that I put on there, I just labeled my paper that I was taking notes on, one side connection, the other side addiction, and put an arrow because there's two different sides of that coin. And addiction separates you. Right. And just like his own story, he got so far into the addiction that he lost relationship and isolated himself. His roommate was like, "Who are you?" And I don't think he knew. Right. At one point, except to your point, he was gaining status in that world of gaming. Yes. He was somebody there. He was somebody there. But in the real world, not in fantasy world, but in the real world, he lost connection. So I loved that good habits, bad habits, because the bad habits that we start, no matter what they may be, another way that we were talking about it at the workshop, the bad habits, even though they may start small, the small bad habit can lead to an addiction later. And so he really focused on that. So which column are you going to put that in? Are you going to put it in connection column? Or are you going to put it in addiction column on the small bad habit? So that's a practical way of looking at that, but it's also a very good way to look at that.
Yes. And one of the questions that he asked as like a self-reflective question that could help you maybe define if something you were engaging in would be like under a bad habit or potentially an addiction was the question of, do you like what it is costing you? And I thought that was insightful in a way to help differentiate between the two.
Yes. Do you like what it is costing you? That's an excellent question. And I think we have also a moment to say, if there is someone in your life that is addicted to this gaming, let's say you're a parent and a child that you know is watching too much. If you just know a neighbor, or if you have a family member, or you have a spouse that is playing all the time, or you yourself, or whatever. But if you need to approach someone, what we know as a therapist is, and it may seem counterintuitive to the layperson, but what we know is validation is so, so important as a therapist, to meet people where they are. Like, I totally get it, Katie. I understand. You don't know where else to go. And you're looking for a way out. You validate where you are. Now, do you live there? No, you validate so that you know that you're heard and understood. And then, and that's what we were doing, like some role playing. Sure. And everything. But you do have to validate. If you don't, the person you're talking to gets super defensive really quick.
They won't feel seen.
No, or heard or understood. They have to be defensive because it becomes confrontational. Right. Like, get off your phone. What are you doing? Katie, are you crazy? Get off the phone. You're automatically going to be defensive.
Whereas it might be more helpful to approach someone from the stance of, hey, I've noticed lately that you seem a little more attached to your phone. And I'm a little concerned because it seems like sometimes that's getting in the way of us really getting to connect or have a conversation. And I just, I know we all have to be on our phones. I know that so much of life now is managed through your phone, but I just wanted to mention that I've noticed that, and I'm wondering if maybe there's a way that we could together work on finding times to step away from our phones so we can really connect with each other.
I know. I really do need to be a lot better at that. You're right. Something like that.
Yes.
That would be so much better. Rather than get off your phone.
Mm-hmm.
I never see you. I never talk to you. Stop it.
Mm-hmm.
All the things that we typically hear from people.
Right.
Right. So that is what validation truly is. And that's what we need more of for a conversation to get started and for the essence of the word connection to really happen,
Mm-hmm.
to take place. So that is the beauty of connection. Now, I know we're jumping again, trying to get so many things fit in here. But one of the things I also loved was, what can we do too?
Yes. Like, what's the alternative?
Yes. What are some things? And I know you've got some things written down, and I pulled them up too. But just a few things as possibilities is one is maybe a 30-day fast.
Yes. He had mentioned removing access for at least 30 days.
Like for 30 days. And one thing that I thought was interesting is that includes a 30-day fast. That also includes, along with other dopamine triggers. It might be sugary foods also, because you don't want to remove your screen time, but then raid your pantry for 30 days.
Right.
That's not helpful.
Right.
So remove the sugary food if that's your other trigger at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was good.
Yes. He talked about how our brains naturally will seek a replacement for whatever that dopamine hit was that we're abstaining from.
Mm-hmm. And then have a community around you, at least of 5 people.
Yes. He mentioned resources such as like a 12-step program or something like Celebrate Recovery, or choosing, 5 people that you can trust to walk alongside you.
Mm-hmm. And, we can't do this alone.
Right.
Because I don't think God designed us to do it alone. He designed us to need Him.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need Him and we need others. So I think it's a very wise thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The other thing that Ian had mentioned too is having a way to check in with yourself and just have some self-reflection.
Yes.
About how you're doing.
Self-awareness.
Yes.
I think you said.
And to look at how you're doing physically, emotionally, relationally, mentally, and spiritually.
Mm-hmm. Self-awareness is huge. A lot of times I'll say at the end of Psalm 139, show me as you see me, God. Just a time of reflection with God, asking Him, kind of a mirror moment.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing he said that I thought was helpful to think about when you're wanting to replace, screen time habits with something that is more life-giving and sustaining was to think about the time of day when you would be most prone to be engaging in screen time, like in an unhealthy or addictive way, and to find a replacement activity that you could do during that same time of day. He talked about trying to find more of a natural source for that.
Those are all so good. They're so good and helpful and practical.
Yes.
Which is very helpful at a time when you need it. You're crying out. Well, we just appreciate you being part of the Tangible Truth podcast. Katie, we could talk about this for a long time, actually. Again, thank Chad Imhoff and Ian McCready from SelfCtrl. I want to thank the Joshua Center for putting that on. They'll have many more too. And Angela Imhoff too. I think she's the one that puts it all together, of course. But so I just really appreciate that. And it was great. And I'm glad we got to recap it together while it was fresh on our minds. it went hand in glove with the Brutal Realities of Pornography from the last 4 episodes. And if you've not heard that, I think it's very important that you go back and listen to those. They're very good, not because they're Tangible Truth podcasts. It's just great information that everyone needs to have. Pornography is definitely on the rise, and we need more information. People don't know what they don't know. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
So, Katie, thank you for being part of us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate walking alongside you as a counselor and a colleague. And thank you for creating the space to have important conversations like this.
Well, thank you, Katie. You're great. I love Katie Ubben. Yeah. You're great, Katie. So thank you. And thank you, listeners. We love you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Tangible Truth Podcast, part of the KLRC Podcast Network.